ahead and open our Bibles to the book of Isaiah, chapter 5. How many of you read chapter 5? What a fantastic chapter. It's one of my favorites. I know I say that a lot of times about every chapter, every book, but a lot of other people too really enjoy this chapter. It's an amazing chapter. And I am told that if you can read Hebrew fluently, it's one of the most beautiful pieces of poetry in the way that it's all put together. But we're continuing our study, and we've come to chapter 5, the last chapter of the introduction. This book, you remember, has 5 chapters of just introduction. So we're going to finish the introduction tonight, and then next week we'll get into the book of Isaiah, okay? So the Lord takes up a parable. This chapter is known as the parable of the vineyard. The Lord takes up a parable in which he likens the people of Judah to a vineyard. The first chapter, you remember, was a summary, an introduction of the whole presentation of the major themes of the book. He basically gives an outline or a table of contents for everything that's going to come in the rest of the book. And then in chapter 2 through 4, he presents the tension between himself, creator of the universe, and his people who he loves but aren't paying attention, and he wants to get their attention. He wants to draw them back to himself. He doesn't want to just wipe them out. He doesn't even really want to punish them. I don't know how many of you heard this before. I remember my dad all the time would say, "This hurts me more than it hurts you." And I'm thinking, well, then don't do it. We'll both be happy. But when I became a parent, I understood what that meant. There's discipline that's necessary to bring your children around, to place them on the right path, to keep them on the right path. And it's not fun to do that, but sometimes you have to do those kinds of things. So that's what he was doing. This is actually the third prophetic sermon in the book of Isaiah. And he's presenting the conditions of Israel in Isaiah's day and the consequences. Now it starts out with a song, and he tells us that in verse 1. I'm going to sing a song of my well-beloved. And it's a casual song, but the song was used to kind of draw them in. And the song turns into a courtroom drama. We're going to see who's going to judge and who's going to make decisions about what's going on and why it's happening. And then the courtroom drama ends in pure condemnation. We know who's done wrong. We know who's broken the law. We know who's made a mess of things. And they all were listening to the beautiful song, and the next thing they know, they're being condemned for all the stuff they've done. So it's kind of interesting how he does this. Now in verse 1 through 7 is the song, and it flows into a sermon. And it reminds me a lot of what Nathan did with David. Do you remember that story? Yes. David had sinned. David was hiding it. David wasn't going to give it up. David was miserable, but nobody knew. So he thought. And when we think those things, God always knows what's going on. And God sent Nathan to David. Now, this is a heavy situation. Nathan could have been put to death. David could have set off with his head, and that's it. It's over. But Nathan started with a story, and he said, you know, there's these 2 guys, and one was a rich guy, and one was a poor guy, and one guy had a whole lot of flocks of sheep, and one guy only had one little sheep, and the rich guy took the poor guy's sheep, and David actually condemns his own actions, because Nathan kind of tricked him into it. He goes, that's horrible, this guy should die. And Nathan goes, and you're the man. That's what this song is like. It's like we got this vineyard and we've worked on it hard. It's not a good vineyard. What do you think the problem is? Well, I don't know. It's not good. Yeah, it's your problem. It's why we're singing this song, because of what you have done. So Isaiah sets up his hearers to judge themselves. And he begins in verse 1. He says, now let me sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved regarding his vineyard. My well-beloved has a vineyard on a very fruitful hill. Does this sound familiar at all? Sounds like the Song of Solomon, doesn't it? It's actually kind of getting people's attention. It's like, hey, we're going to hear a song about a soap opera. It's going to be about a guy courting a woman, my well-beloved, a fruitful vine. Remember the fruitful vine was the woman in Song of Solomon? So they're being drawn in. They're literally being drawn in. My well-beloved has a vineyard. So the vineyard has a lot of advantages. It belongs to a loving person. That's a good thing. It's been planted on a fruitful hill. That's a good thing. You know, we've had fruit produced there before. We know it's a good farming area. And then he goes on and he says he dug it up. He cleared out stones. He planted it with the choicest vine. He built a tower in the midst and also made a winepress in it. So he expected to bring forth good grapes, but it brought forth wild grapes. The ground is very specifically, very carefully prepared. He dug it up and cleared it out. He planted good stock. Planted it with the choicest vine. It was protected. It had a watchtower in the middle. And provision was made for the fruit to be processed. We've even got the wine press. We're all ready for when the fruit becomes ripe and we can process it and turn it into wine. And he expected it to bring forth good fruit. That's not surprising, considering all the advantages he gave. If you went out and you planted a vineyard or a garden and did everything and weeded and watered and all that, wouldn't you expect to get some produce out of it? And you come out and there's nothing. And it's ruined and it's rotten. You'd be a little disappointed for that. Instead, it brought forth wild grapes. Literally, these are poisonous berries. There's a story in 2 Kings chapter 4. Do you remember that there was the school of the prophets and they're all putting together this meal and this guy goes out and he finds some berries and chop it into the meal and it makes everybody sick. He got the wrong berries. He got the wild berries. And these wild berries are beautiful berries, but they're bitter and they stink and they make you sick. And he's saying, that's all I got is stink berries that make me want to throw up. So this is what you would expect if you had done nothing to the land. That's the kind of thing that grows fallow. That's the kind of thing that grows wild. So if you've been to Israel, it's quite a job. You look around and you see some of these walls and these terraces that they built with stones, just rocks, and built them up. And I can't help but thinking, how many hundreds of years have they been at this? Some of them for thousands of years, making these terraces, clearing out the rocks, making fences, making good ground. And then you plant the vines, and when the vines grow, the vineyard kind of comes up on the ground. Well, they put rocks under the grapes so that they're off the ground. We want them to stay up off the dirt. We want them out of the dirt. We want to clean them. The vine dressers actually go through and wash the grapes. Some of them put up trellises so the grapes can grow up, but you've got to continually watch them. I read one article that said growing a vineyard is one of the toughest gardens you can grow. It takes a lot of work. And so they're out there doing all of this work. And again, we've got this picture in here, this illusion of a man and a bride. Remember, we saw the vineyard in Song of Solomon. So he's cultivating this relationship, drawing the people in with a song. And he's wooing this woman, and it turns out to be disappointing. That's a bummer. But that's the way the song is going. Hope for good fruit. All of his work was for nothing. The vine disappointed him. Ezekiel tells us if the vine does not produce fruit, it's good for nothing, right? Isaiah next appeals to his audience, the people of Jerusalem and Judah, and he says, hey, I'm telling you the story, I'm singing the song, I need your help on this. Let's get the whole audience in on it. What's your opinion? Actually, I'd like you guys to judge. I'd like you to tell me what you think. What more could I have done for my garden? What else should I have done for my garden? And when you hear the description of everything that's done, the answer is, I don't know, what else could you have done? Still drawing them in, still pulling them in there. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge, please, between me and my vineyard. It almost sounds silly, doesn't it? Judge between me and my grapes, my stinky grapes. You determine, you make judgment. Is this the fault of the owner of the vineyard? Did he not do enough? Did he not do right? Or is it the fault of the fruit? It just was bad in itself. He said, what more could I have done to my vineyard that I have not done? So in the story, there's nothing left undone by the owner of the vineyard. He did all he could do. In the very same way that God can't be blamed for the wild grapes that Israel was bringing forth. And that's the point he's going to come to. What more could I have done? I did all I could do. I brought them into the land. I established cities. I gave them vineyards. What more could I have done to ensure a good crop? Sounds like a lot of parents. I sent them to the best schools. I bought them nice clothes. They got all the toys they wanted. And why did they end up being so weird? Is it the fault of the owner of the vineyard, or is it the fault of the vine? Well, what more could I have done to my vineyard that I have not done? Verse 4. And why then, when I expected it to bring forth good grapes, did it bring forth wild grapes? Why? Why did his vines produce worthless, sour grapes? You judge. The answer would have to be, well, you've done nothing more than you did. You couldn't do anything more. The grapes were the cause of the disappointment. So the question is, for us, there's an application here. Have we done the same? Have we rewarded the well-beloved by being ungrateful for all of his work? Are we stinky grapes? I don't want to be a stinky grape. Have we given him hardness of heart instead of repentance, belief, and faith? Have we been indifferent, and instead of love, been idle? Instead of obedience, instead of purity, we've given him impurity. So God's going to explain what he's going to do to his disappointing vineyard. Verse 5. Now, please, let me tell you what I'm going to do to my vineyard. I'll take away the hedge. This is the stone wall around it. This is what kept animals out from eating the fruit and the produce. It's what kept robbers out a lot of times. The watchtower was to find all these people. I'm going to take away the hedge, and I'm going to burn it. I'm just going to burn it down. There's nothing we can do with the bad vines anyhow. I'll break down its wall, and it'll be trampled down. The Hebrew here in verse 5, where he begins with "and now," implies something irrevocable and a decision of prompt action. I'm doing this right away. I'm not waiting a couple of months. I'm going to break it down, and I'm going to destroy it immediately. He would stop protecting and abandon it to the elements and the enemies. Verse 6, I will lay it waste. It shall not be pruned or dug, but there shall come up briars and thorns. And I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain on it. He wouldn't invest any more labor in it. He would even stop providing the nourishment it needed, and he would even assist in its destruction. That's a little scary. You know, there's times in our walk when we might wish that the Lord would stop pruning, stop digging, stop watering. Lord, I enough. But it's even worse when the Lord decides to stop. Fine. No more. That's scary. Then Isaiah shocks his audience because they're being drawn in by the song, by the story. They've been invited to help out and judge. Now he's going to shock them because he's going to identify who the characters in the song are. Verse 7. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel. I'm singing about you guys. And the men of Judah are his pleasant plant. He looked for justice, but behold oppression, for righteousness, but behold a cry for help. This probably didn't make some people happy right there. There's a cry from those being oppressed, and God was looking for fruit from his vineyard. He wanted good fruit. He got the fruit of oppression. Jesus, John 15 says, I'm the true vine, and my Father's the vine dresser. Every branch in me that doesn't bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes that it may bear more fruit. And again, in the land of Israel, you'll notice there's one particular valley, the Valley of Eshcol. That's where Joshua and Caleb brought out this gigantic bunch of grapes. They're always displayed as giant grapes. I don't know if it was just a whole bunch of grapes or if they were really big. Some of the biggest grapes I've ever had were in the Jordan Valley. I mean, they were literally this big. I couldn't get the whole thing in my mouth, and I got a big mouth, so it was a little difficult. But brought this produce back from that particular valley, and again, they grow on the ground, they're propped up with rocks, and the vine dressers cleanse them, clean them. And Jesus is referencing this. The Father's the husbandman, and he cleanses the branches. Jesus said, you're already clean through the word which I have spoken to you. So we've gone through that process of being washed and cleaned and protected so that we can produce good fruit. And why am I cleansed? That I might bring forth more fruit for God. What is it that God's interested in my life? Fruit. He wants good fruit. It's what he's interested in from the nation of Israel. Why has he done so much for them? That they might bring forth fruit. Why does he do so much for us? That we might bring forth good fruit for him. We read again, by this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit. It's what God desires from our lives, that we bring much fruit. So the Lord comes to his garden. He's looking for fruit. Interesting that in the same context in which Jesus takes the vine and makes the application to the church, he speaks this commandment. He says, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Fruit, love. Yeah, Galatians tells us the fruit of the Spirit is love. All those other things are products of love, okay? So here's what I want from you guys. Here's the fruit I want. I want you to love. Love each other. Really the fruit he's looking for, because out of love, we produce true judgment, righting of wrongs, and fairness. If you love, you're not going to oppress someone. In the Old Testament, it says, let's have righteous judgment. Let's not oppress the poor and these kind of things. But to put it in a positive sense, the New Testament says, let us love one another as we love ourselves. If you love yourself, you're not going to take advantage of other people. Think about that. Think about the person you love the most right now. I think I'll cheat them. Oh, that doesn't even come into your mind, does it? I think I'll do something horrible to them. Why? I love them. I wouldn't want to do that. What I want to do is help others. We'll be lifting up the ones who have fallen. We'll give aid to those who are down. We're going to be concerned with the needs for others. That's the kind of fruit that God's looking for in our lives and in the church today. He would desire that we would have a genuine concern for one another and helping those in need. Because, again, we read in Corinthians, if one member suffers, all the members suffer. So we all step in to help the one that's hurting, that's down. And we see that love in the body is where we begin to bear one another's burdens and fulfill the law of Christ. Now, the opposite of this is selfishness. I'm concerned about me. I'm not going to help others because I'm going to help me. Oh, I'll be religious. I'll give as long as it doesn't take away from me. As long as it doesn't take too much of my time or my treasure or my talent or whatever it is I've got, I will give sparingly. And he comes to his garden to collect the fruit, and he finds nothing but wild grapes. He'll forsake the garden. This is what I will do. Tell me, let me tell you what I'll do to my vineyard. I'll take away the hedge. It'll be burned. I'll break down the wall. It'll be trampled down. I'll lay it waste. It'll not be pruned or dug. There shall come up briars and thorns. And I'll also command the clouds that they rain no rain on it. I'm going to forsake the garden. And then God's going to pronounce his woes on Israel. There's actually 6 of them, 6 indictments. Sounds familiar these days, indictments. How many indictments is this person getting, you know? Well, I've got 6 for you in Israel. I'm going to call you into the court. I've asked for people to judge. And here's the 6 indictments against you. Here's the 6 counts that you're going to face. And the word woe, he starts each one of these indictments with the words woe. In Hebrew it's hoy, or hoya, hoya. Here it is. Woe to those who join house to house They add field to field till there's no place where they may dwell alone in the midst of the land. Kind of makes me think of all the building that's going on around here, with condominiums, townhouses, warehouses everywhere. Hardly a space anywhere anymore. And the Israelites were buying out their neighbors as they had opportunity and made the opportunity to increase their land holdings. The wealthier or the smarter members of the community took advantage of the less fortunate brothers, so they deprived them of their opportunity to live in the land that God had given them. Now, buying additional land is not wrong in itself. It's when you're buying the land and it oppresses other people. Maybe you've heard some of those stories where in LA, I'm going to buy out this apartment building. People have been living there for years. I'm going to raise the rent so high they can't stay here anyway because I need this land for a parking lot. I can make a lot more money that way, or whatever it is they're going to be. A medical facility, a grocery store. And they put the people on the street in a lot of cases. That's the kind of thing he's talking about here, where you're oppressing other people. You're abusing other people. That's when it becomes wrong. I don't think Isaiah was condemning large farms or estates per se. He was condemning squeezing out the small guy, taking something away from the small man, so that they can make themselves more prosperous, more secure, and more admired. Wow, he's a real estate magnate. Didn't think you would come to church for a real estate lesson, did you? I'm like, this is crazy. Those who did this in his day ended up isolated, and rather than enjoying fellowship with their brothers, God would judge this greed by causing the families of the isolated rich to dwindle. They would shrink, they would disappear, the family name would disappear. When these men who were covetous after the things of the world, God has a way of making them be filled with disappointment and bitterness. In verse 9, he says, "In my hearing, the Lord of hosts said, truly, many houses shall be desolate, great and beautiful ones without inhabitant." Oh, they've spent so much time and money in building this house and preparing. Well, it's all going to disappear. As Christians, we always say, it's all going to burn. He's doing this before the fact. The land will be worn out. It won't produce. And it's ironically, by the time, think about this for a minute, by the time a person has enough money to build a mansion, they're usually too old to enjoy it. I'm going to build a 1-story now, not the 2 or 3-story, because I can't get up the stairs anymore. And his family's grown up. They've all moved out. His spouse may die soon too, because she's old, like he is. And God would judge farmers by decreasing the productivity of their crops. And here's the decrease. This is amazing. 10 acres of a vineyard will yield 1 bath, and a homer of seed shall yield 1 ephah. So the land hungry would become hungry. It doesn't matter how many acres you own, God still controls the weather and the agricultural productivity. It was one of God's promised blessings when they came into the land. I'll give you produce. I'll make you prosper. I'll give you more than you need if you put your trust in me, if you pay attention to me, if you do what I ask you to do. Now, I always wonder what these things are, so I had to go look it up. 10 acres of vineyard, that's a lot of vineyards, will produce 1 bath, 9 gallons of grape juice. 10 acres, less than an acre a gallon for juice. What a waste of time, right? And a homer of seed is in some places called a donkey load. That's how much a donkey could carry out to be planted. It's about 6 bushels, and it's only going to produce 1 ephah. An ephah is 3/5 of a bushel, just about a half a bushel. You're going to plant 6 bushels, and you're only getting back a half. You're wasting it. So there was real famine conditions. Now the second woe, or the second count, is against drunkenness, self-indulgence, or pleasure-seeking. Woe to those who party endlessly and celebrate everything but God. And this is 11 through 17. Woe to those who rise early in the morning, that they may follow intoxicating drink, who continue until night. till wine inflames them. Sounds like a good description of an alcoholic, doesn't it? Drinking as soon as he gets up, starting the day with a drink. Met a lot of guys like that in the military. Can't go anywhere. I mean, a lot of the people I know today, it's like, I gotta have my cup of coffee. But these guys were like, I gotta have a beer before I can even move, you know? It's a picture of those who work hard to party. And the problem is, when you're working hard to party, God's forgotten. You forget the Lord. The harp and the strings, the tambourine, the flute, and the wine are in their feast. Got a lot of good music, but they don't regard the work of the Lord, nor consider the operation of his hands. People that are looking for entertainment and pleasure are absorbed in their sensual pleasures to the point that they don't really give God any consideration in their lives. These people were what we would call today party animals. And that's what the Lord is accusing Judah and Jerusalem of. You guys are all party animals. Now, again, music is okay, but is music your God? Is music your dream? Is music your idol? And do you live for the music? Do you live for the party? Nothing wrong with having fun. You can have fun in the Lord, but are you just looking for fun without the Lord? If you are, you'll be insensitive to spiritual things. Anyone who really knows him will live life as if there's more to life than partying. When pleasure becomes the most important thing in a person's life, their passion for God is squeezed out. Now, God's going to give an explanation for the coming judgment. He says in verse 13, therefore, because the people have gone pleasure mad, didn't regard God in their lives. Therefore, my people have gone into captivity. Mark that, would you please? Have gone into. That's important. Because they have no knowledge. Their honorable men are famished, and their multitude dried up with thirst. Those who forget about God because of their partying and entertainment are going to be judged by captivity. And guess what? Nobody's going to be laughing anymore. The result of driving other people off their land, living only for pleasure, would be, ironically, that the Israelites would be driven off their land and not having much pleasure. Instead of more food and drink, there would be famine and parched throats. Carousing would end in captivity. Now, I wanted you to notice the words have gone. This is what's known in the Hebrew as the prophetic perfect tense, because it hasn't happened yet. He's speaking of a future event, but he's addressing it as done. Because this is God's point of view. It's already done. When God says, I'm going to do this, it's already as good as done. So he's saying they have gone. Verse 14, therefore Sheol has enlarged itself and opened its mouth beyond measure, their glory and their multitude and their pomp. And he who is jubilant shall descend into it. Instead of pleasure seeking and opening their mouths to quench their thirst with the alcohol, he's saying Sheol, place of the dead, sometimes referred to as hell, is going to open its mouth, and all the partiers and all the drinkers are going to be swallowed up there. That's where your pomp's going. That's where your glory. That's where the jubilant are going to go. Wow. And the people shall be brought down. Each man shall be humbled, and the eyes of the lofty shall be humbled. But the Lord of hosts shall be exalted in judgment, and God, who is holy, shall be hallowed in righteousness. Then the lambs shall feed in their pasture. It's because you aren't there to take them away from people anymore. And the waste places of the fat ones, strangers shall eat. Enemies are going to come into your land. Then the next woe, the third count, is against the addiction to sin, skepticism, mocking the prophet's warnings. And this is verse 18 through 23. Woe to those who draw iniquity with cords of vanity, and sin as if it was a cart rope. In other words, they're pulling sin to themselves. They're drawing sin in. I'm pulling sin with me. I want to take it wherever I go. And they flatter themselves by imagining that what is sin is not sin. Yeah, hey, what are you dragging all that sin around? Oh, it's not sin. This is good stuff. I'm taking it with me. They say, let him make speed and hasten his work, that we may see it. And let the counsel of the Holy One of Israel draw near and come, that we may know it. They're literally challenging God here and his judgment. In saying these empty words, they show that they're arrogant and they have contempt for the Lord. It's literally as if they're saying, go ahead, God. If you're real, strike me dead. You heard anybody say that? I've heard that when I'm out witnessing. And most of the time I wish, do it, Lord, please. But let there be a lot of people around so that they can all be scared into getting saved. That doesn't work, but we're ready for your judgment. Let God do something that we can see it. If he's really real, show us. And so they're deliberately sinning. They hadn't fallen innocently. They were pursuing sin willfully. Rather than running away, they're holding it close to them. Even worse, they're baiting God to try and get him to respond. Lord, if you hear you say you are, do something. They believed, and you may have heard this even in our country, that he would not punish them. I mean, come on, we're one nation under God. We sing in God we trust. It's on all of our coins, come on. We've always gotten out of these messes before. Why would God destroy us? That was Israel's thinking. That's what they're doing here. He can't do us any harm. Maybe he just won't do us any harm. So let it begin as soon as he pleases. I don't know that any Israelites actually said that. We don't see it recorded in Scripture. But this was the language of their actions. Sometimes actions speak louder than words, and that's what's going on here. Their ties to sin were like cords that people used to lead their animals and cart ropes that were stronger and harder to break. The next woe, the fourth count, is against willful confusion of standards of right and wrong and perversity. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil. Boy, have we heard that lately a lot. Who put darkness for light and light for darkness. Who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. They are using clever and deceptive words, and they blur moral issues to excuse their sin. Well, it's not that bad. It's not as bad as this guy. They look at their own evil and they call it good. And they look at others who are doing good and call it evil. Isaiah is describing a deep state of moral confusion. Well, we've never seen that before, have we? They call those of us who believe in creation misfits and fools. Another example would be glorifying adultery. That's a problem in our nation. Treating committed believers as dangerous radicals. That's even on the news. Mocking God's ways privately and publicly, they refuse to accept the standard of God's revelation. And I believe we're living in an age when evil is being called good and good is being called evil. Men who stand up for what's decent and moral are made to look like fools in the media. If people who are interested in decency and morality gather together to do something about things like abortion or child prostitution or child pornography, they're called Nazis. And the media says they want to take away our free speech. Oh my gosh. They want to force our moral standards, their moral standards, on other people. They want us to live like them. Of course I do. I don't want you to live like you are in opposition to God, but I can't force you. I'm just telling you, get it out of my face. We don't want our children to be exposed to Playboy girls on the cover when we go to the grocery store for a carton of milk or whatever else they may be displaying there. I used to go nuts driving down the 10 freeway. There's all these billboards of this gentleman's club and that gentleman's club, and it's like, I'm taking my kids to church. This isn't what I want them to see. Hey, you guys, get a book. Read the book. Don't look out the windows. No. I don't want them to have to deal with the wicked and vile imaginations of perverted men. And we want some laws that deal with perverted people who display themselves to shock our children.
That goes on regularly too. So we're made to be fools and prudes and idiots, and yet there's a community that gets together and they raise funds and they lobby for legislation so that they can bring liberalization to their activities and have parades and do stuff right out on the street during their parade. And the news comes in and says, this is progress for these people. You know who I'm talking about. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, and who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Now the next woe, the fifth count, is against arrogance and conceit. They thought they were wiser than God, and they are much more clever than God. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight, full of pride, rejected wisdom and standards of God. Men who are wise in their own sight are men who do not look at themselves in the light of God. I don't care about God's standards, I care about my standards. And as far as my standards go, I'm doing pretty good. You don't want to look at God's standards because you'll find out you're not doing very well at all. They're men who don't judge themselves by his standards, but their own. And they say things, you've met these people, they say things, oh, the Bible, that's so judgmental. You know, you have your interpretation, I have mine. And all this exalts the wisdom of man over the word of God. The sixth and last woe is a count against indulgence and bribery, which leads to contempt and injustice. They had adopted corrupt values. Woe to the man mighty at drinking wine. Woe to men valiant for mixing intoxicating drinks. This is absolutely nuts, isn't it? Hey, that bartender is so good. Man, he's a hero. We all got to go to the bar and watch him mix drinks. That's incredible. What? You got nothing better to do? No, but drink whatever he mixes. And mighty men at drinking wine. The more the person could drink, the greater people honored him. That guy can hold his liquor. Boy, this guy puts away a fifth a night. Amazing, isn't he? No. Stupid, probably. Who justify the wicked for a bribe and take away justice from the righteous man. God's talking about legislators and judges. These men are only caring for their own pleasure and entertainment, care nothing for others. By the way, kind of interesting, I don't know why, but every time I come to a passage like this, I look up the alcohol consumption in the United States. And did you know Washington, D.C. is the highest, third highest in the nation per capita? Now, if ever I wanted somebody to have a clear mind at work, it would be those people who have nuclear power, you know, or in charge of weapons and armies and other things. I think they need a clear head, but that's tragic. We need to pray for our judges. Those without the Lord, will tell you they have to have something to cope with all the things that they see and the things that they hear. But woe unto them who are taking bribes and judge unrighteously. Then verse 24 and 5 are the second explanation for the coming judgment. Therefore, as the fire devours the stubble and the flame consumes the chaff, so their roots shall be as rottenness, and their blossom will ascend like dust, because they've rejected the law of the Lord of hosts and despised the word of the Holy One of Israel. So God is warning. And it's going to be sudden, it's going to be complete, and it's going to be severe. And every one of Judah's sins could be traced back to a time of rejecting and despising what God said. I imagine that might be true of each of us too. Therefore, the anger of the Lord is aroused against his people. He has stretched out his hand against them and stricken them, and the hills tremble. Their carcasses were as refuse in the midst of the street. For all his anger For all this, his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. So God brought judgment, but he's not through yet. He's also going to bring a well-equipped nation with a very powerful army against Israel to complete the judgments for the sins that were enumerated in the 6 counts above. Verse 26, he will lift up his banner for the nations from afar. And I love this. He'll whistle to them from the end of the earth. Isn't that, can you see the image? The Lord going, guys, over here, destroy these people. You got a powerful army. You've been training. You've been practicing. I got some real life warfare for you. Come on over. Wow. He whistles for them to come from the end of the earth. Surely they shall come with speed. All right, let's get over there. God's going to call 4 nations to come and invade Judah, making them the instruments of his judgments upon them. Now he's going to go on and describe this army. No one will be weary or stumble among them. No one will slumber or sleep. Nor will the belt on their loins be loosed, nor the strap of their sandals be broken. Whose arrows are sharp and all their bows bent. Their horses' hooves will seem like flint, and the wheels like a whirlwind. Their roaring is as a lion. They will roar like young lions. They will roar, they will lay hold of prey, and they will carry it away safely, and no one will deliver. The armies God would call against Judah would be all business. We're looking for a fight. They would be totally focused, totally prepared, and totally ready, while the strong men of Judah are having drinking contests. What do you think's going to win in a battle like that? I can beat you in how many drinks I can take. Well, so Judah and Jerusalem were carried away captive to Babylon. And in that day they will roar against them like a roaring of the sea. And if one looks to the land, behold darkness and sorrow, and the light is darkened by the clouds. In the opening of the book of Isaiah, we see the judgments of God. Remember, this is all introduction, the first 5 chapters. But we're going to go on from there. And actually, in chapters 6 through 10, we'll begin to see the one who's going to come forth in judgment and establish a kingdom and righteousness upon the earth. I told you I love chapter 5. I really love chapter 6. Yes. In chapter 6, Isaiah has a powerful vision of God. And we're going to look into that next week. This is where we're going to end this evening. Would you all stand with me and let's pray.